So we are a country divided between blue and red politically, between black and white racially. Heck, COVID has divided us between masks and no masks. It's a reality that's not going away. What are we going to do about it? Get used to being uncomfortable. It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how in this time of division we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
No, I understand what it's up.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real. He says you're heading. I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car. Right. Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. All right, hey everybody, welcome to the show. Happy Friday. Streaming at you, whatever platforms you are on, from Reddit to Facebook to YouTube to TikTok and platforms not yet invented. I'm here in our virtual studios in Florida. Producer Crafty is in our virtual studios in Los Angeles. As you can see, we have matching studios. And Crafty has a tie. Let's see the tie, Crafty. Crafty has look at that tie, man. What a tie Crafty's wearing. You know, I couldn't pull that off. Nice look, Crafty. Nice look.
Yeah,
so
it just matches. It matches the look good.
That's right. Crafty's classy, Crafty. He's always welcoming fashion input. All right, you guys, thanks for being with us. A big show tonight. Let's jump right in. I want a lot of interaction. I'm going to try to throw some questions at you guys. I set this up that we are in an uncomfortable time. I think the uncomfortable time is something we are going to have to get used to. I've spent a lot of time trying to convince everybody we got to figure out how to come together, and we do. But I'm realizing we're not going to come together by ending our disagreements. We're going to have to figure out how to come together over our disagreements. Let me start out with shootings. Just for a second here, shootings and more shootings. It's like I don't want to do a show every time on shootings, but there's more shootings all the time. I honestly can't believe how many shootings there are, if you think about it. And I'm not making this up. They're going up. Like there was another mass shooting yesterday, or there was one this morning. There's I can't keep track of where they happen. It's like every day, either there's another police-related shooting or there's another mass shooter who goes into a store, a mall, an office, and kills 4 people. Not to mention all the shootings that are already happening in a lot of urban communities, you know, what people like to call the black on black or brown on brown or black on brown violence. That's been going on the whole time. This is a whole nother level. We're just like shooting each other up left, right, and center. It's like we've come out of the pandemic and people are like wild, wild west gun happy. It's a little scary. And people are always like, never thought it would happen in our town. Again, I don't know how anybody doesn't think it's going to happen in their town. Like it's happening everywhere. A couple things on the shootings. And I use this as part of the beginning of the uncomfortable conversations. Did you know? I didn't. Did you know who Derek Chauvin was married to? I really had no idea. You don't pay attention to the little details, okay? I had a picture of Derek Chauvin's ex-wife. I didn't even realize he was married. Crafty, can we see Derek Chauvin's ex-wife? There she is. So yeah, she's Asian. she was Mrs. Minnesota. She was married to him. Thanks, Crafty. She's Asian. Now, why am I shocked by that? I don't know, because I guess clearly like the guy's a racist. Maybe he is. Maybe he just doesn't like black people. Maybe he's not a racist. Maybe he's just a violent dude. I mean, she married the guy, right? And she said, 6 months before the whole shooting, she did a whole post. She did a big interview because she was Mrs. Minnesota. And she said how he's just a softie underneath that exterior. Not so much of a softie, right? I mean, it's not a softie to me. But it reminded me of how we make judgments. Again, the guy deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life, and he's going to be miserable for it because of what he did. But I immediately assume the guy's a racist. I don't know. Maybe he just likes Asian women. On an interesting sidebar side note, the day the video came out, not like right after, I remember like 3 days later, the YouTube video got released, after he killed George Floyd. That day, she divorced him. She filed for divorce that day. That woman was like, I see what's coming down the pike. And this maybe is a tiny element of humor in a really tragic time, but like she filed for the divorce the next day, and she asked for everything. The houses, the bank accounts, his retirement and pension funds. Like she was like, dude, my husband's going to jail for the rest of his life. This is like 2 days later. I'm out of the marriage and I want everything because he's not going to need. He's going to be locked up for the rest of his life. Like she saw the writing on the wall. The judge actually denied her the divorce the first time. They had to go back and like ask for a little less. I mean, harsh, but you know, that's how it works. Second note on the shooting stuff and on the lack of sort of common ground we have. George Floyd Square. If you go into George Floyd Square in Minneapolis, there's a big sign. Can we see the big sign, Crafty? Monkey arms, Asians are smart. I'm married to one. Yes, Asians are smart, right? Yes, 100%. That's like, you know, monkey arms, that's kind of a racial stereotype, right? And I'm kidding you. Obviously, we all make racial stereotypes. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not. Crafty, put that sign back up for me. Sorry, I got distracted by monkey arms. Welcome to George Floyd Square, a sacred space for community, public grief, and protest. You know, and it's nice, right? Nice idea. Come in, share, care for each other. But I want to focus on the bottom part here for white people in particular. Let me read that. Let me see the close-up on that, Crafty. Here we go. Decenter yourself and come to listen, learn, mourn, and witness. You're here to support, not to be supported. I'm laughing because this gets so woke that it's funny. Be mindful of whether your volume, pace, and movements are supporting or undermining your efforts to decenter yourself. First of all, I don't even know what it means to decenter myself. I probably need to decenter myself in a major way. Consider if you want or need to take photos and post them. And if you witness white folks doing problematic things, speak up with compassion to take the burden off black folks and our siblings of color. Seek to engage rather than escalate. Okay, thanks, Crafty. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm all for George Floyd Square. I'm all for having a place for people to come, show reverence, community, connection. But rules for white people? Like, go in there and decenter yourself and don't make it all about you. I don't know. Maybe that's what white liberals will do. Not really sure. But hey, toxic realities. But I thought it was funny. And I also think it's kind of a setup for something that's sad. Because we are it highlights my point of a white and black world that we're living in. These are rules for white people going to George Floyd's Memorial Square. And it's very clear, don't put your crap on black people. And if you see a white person acting out of line, point it out to them and take the burden off the black people. It's like we really are, whether the media is driving it, whether our own narratives are driving it. I don't think it's every single person creating a bifurcated world around black and white, just like we have around red and blue politically. I have picked a lot on Don Lemon. And I picked on a lot of times on Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo, not because I think they're bad guys. I mean, I almost did a show with Chris Cuomo years ago, and like I said, and Andrew Cuomo's brother, I knew because he was married to Kerry Kennedy at the time, way back in the day. And I was friends with Doug Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy's youngest son, and, sort of in that world. But I picked on them because I felt like they had just lost all sense of journalistic perspective on things and were feeding a narrative, which I get. Don Lemon's black. He's black and gay. I get it. He's, he may feel he has two targets on his back and he's fighting to be a voice. I understand that. But I've often felt like it's just a narrative that keeps driving division. So I was really surprised when I saw what he and Chris Cuomo did in their handoff after the shooting of Ma'Khia Bryant in Ohio the other day. And I want to play a tiny clip of their exchange.
Look, I feel you always feel for everybody involved. Sometimes I don't feel for certain parties as much as others, but I feel for that officer.
This is what people, because again, we weren't on the scene.
No.
And but before you say that, Chris, even in the slowed down version, the slow-mo version, that slowed version was a second. Right. Imagine in real time how fast it's happening. You're like looking around, like, what is going on? Someone call the police. Right. And you see someone with a knife and they're trying to stab the other person. And you're like, what do you do? The taser doesn't work that fast. What do I do?
I know. You're like, wait, that's Don Lemon? And again, if you're someone on the left, you might go, see, I told you he's not always on one side. But and I'm not saying it just because he's agreeing with me. I'm saying it because he's actually making like the side that's not been his most of the time to make. He's going, look, I get it. I get it in this case. What's the cop supposed to do? And he even says at one point, and they're back and forth, that's why I'm not a cop. I don't want to have to make that split second decision. At the end, he says, I think one of them would have died. Someone was going to die. I don't know. It's a horrible situation to be in if you're a cop. That goes against that narrative, which is, again, I'm like the lone guy out there saying I think the cops should have tackled them. You know, I actually had dinner the other night with two friends of mine. One guy's a white friend of mine, and he's very conservative, but conservative, but also very committed to trying to see change happen in impoverished communities, and has his heart and his feet in the right place to do it. The other is a former narcotics cop who is black and now teaches diversity training to police departments across the country, doing a big one. They're actually doing a thing that the Miami Heat are sponsoring. They're actually doing the entire Miami police force is getting diversity training, and their approach is really different. And they're doing every single officer in a major police force. And we were talking about all this stuff, and my friend, the former cop, who's been in 6 shootings himself, said, you know, like he was like, Rob, you're not going to tackle a person with a knife. I'm like, why not? He's like, because you're not, because they have a knife and you want to go home for dinner. He's like, you're going to shoot them. That's just what we do. And he's like, and we're not going to shoot him in the leg. I've had these arguments. I'm always the guy like, can't you do something else? He's like, it's not what we're trained to do. Now, maybe we need to retrain. But we also got into this interesting conversation about the realities, because he acknowledged the enormous systemic disparities and realities in policing toward black people. And he's like, yes, black communities are policed harder. Yes, even as a cop, you see racism on the police force. You see racism toward black cops. You see racism toward black communities. And he's like, there's real racism out there, and there's real systemic racism in policing out there. But that said, he's like, at the same time, the solution isn't to hate cops or defund cops, and it's certainly not to ask cops not to have to make these tough decisions and then blast them every time they do. He's like, that girl who got shot, it's too bad, but she was wielding a knife and going to stab somebody. That's what you're going to do. You're going to shoot her to keep someone else alive. It's not about black or white, but we make it about black or white. Yeah, Tyler, you know, I guess we agree on this, right? It did happen so fast, and I feel for the officer too. And my instinct was tackle her. But like, again, my friend, and this cop is one who's talked a lot about like bad policing, not like corrupt cops, like cops who just shouldn't be, just do the job wrong. And he's like, they just screwed that up. It never had to get to that point. He was like, what are you supposed to do? And I'm like, tackle her. He's like, no. So it's a no-win situation. I want to play another clip from Don Lemon about this, and it sets up the bigger idea of the dilemma we're in, and I think the solution we have to kind of look for.
But even in our anguish, we cannot abandon the responsibility we have to be fair. And even while our hearts are hurting, we have to judge each incident based on what we see and the facts we know. When I look at this video, I see police responding to a dangerous incident. If we're going to discuss this case, we need to be honest and use our common sense. We cannot have a double standard. We have to acknowledge that police have jobs to do. But with people dying every day, we've got to find a pathway to justice, a roadmap to take this country to where we need to be, to liberty and justice for all.
So, you know, it really paints the two sides, right? Every case is different, and we have to look at them, and both of them. But the reality is, and I was saying in talking to my black police officer, ex-police officer friend, that the reality is there has been an impartiality, an unfair dual justice system on so many levels, whether it's in over-policing these communities, hard policing on urban communities that makes everybody scared of the cops, whether it's been the disparities in income, the systemic disparities that got put in place over the last 30, 40 years that broke down black communities. You know how many vibrant black communities there were that got crushed like 50, 60, 70 years ago? You know, literally sometimes burned down to the ground and couldn't rebuild. And, you know, Joe Biden, President Biden, who all you on the left seem to love, I love that he called out we need to end the systemic inequalities. Geez, you know, I'm going to point it out again. Your 1994 crime bill is one of the major things, one of the absolute major reasons why there is so many black men in prison. It's a large chunk of that is, to me, on Joe Biden. He was the architect of that, and he pushed it through. But he's not the only one. That systemic inequality created a problem that is, as Don Lemon points out, how do we move toward a more fair sense of justice? And somebody put up a thing, what did LeBron James do? I don't know if that was if you were genuinely asking or you didn't know, but LeBron James put up a tweet right after the shooting of Ma'Khia Bryant that had the picture of the officer and said, "Accountability, you're next." He pulled it back down, and sports outlets like Bleacher Report conveniently sort of left out that he did it. In an article yesterday about it, they said how he said another tweet later, he just put up a tweet that said accountability because he put back one up. But, that's the problem, right? Like, you're next. Put a target on the cops. And cops who are black, someone like Don Lemon who's black, people, from all different perspectives saying that, the police chief saying this one wasn't a case of just wanting to shoot a black person. Like, it was a girl running with a knife. And, I don't know if Don Lemon made the point, like, you don't know how old someone is when they're charging around. You just run into a situation, and what do? What LeBron James does is creating more and more division and creating that continued bias. Is not bringing us toward finding real justice. We're just going to have more and more conflict. So how do we get toward actual something different? And I think it is about reimagining policing. Literally reimagining the way we police, not defunding police, not just like every time a cop shoots somebody pointing out, look, another black person got shot in protest in the street. That's not going to change anything, nor are most of the police reform bills. Although it is shocking that Congress still hasn't passed the police reform bill, the George Floyd for Justice Act. I think that's what it's called. I mean, they managed to pass an anti-Asian hate crimes bill with only, Senator Hawley, like, for whatever reason he says against it. Oh, wow. I'm proud of you guys. Everyone's saying bipartisanship. Oh, wow. You could all agree we shouldn't have hate crimes against Asians. So that's bold. That's a Congress in bold action. And I'm not making fun of Asians getting hate crimes. I mean, there is some, I've said before, I think we're exaggerating. And I don't think it's because the pandemic came from China, but really that's the best they can do. They can pass a bill that says, all right, we're all against Asian hate crimes and we're going to have a task force to look at it. I mean, and reporting method. No, how about you actually do something in criminal justice reform? But what it's going to take, guys, I think, and I want your ideas, what would be effectively re-envisioning policing? Because it's not going to be just defunding or just more sensitivity training or more awareness. You couldn't have more awareness. It's going to take a fundamental re-look at how we do policing. I don't think defunding police equals reimagining policing, Tyler. I want to know why you would think that. I think reimagining policing means taking a different look at what we expect police officers to do, how we expect them to do it. Do you know the number one reason cops are killed is in traffic stops? Cops are killed walking up to cars in traffic stops. Do you want to be a cop walking up to a car in a traffic stop? And you only stay behind your car if there's a felony. If you're going after someone as a felony, you might stay behind the car, but otherwise you approach the car. And cops will argue that way they can see who's in the car. They have more control. They don't want everybody getting out of the car. That's where most cops die. I mean, is one of the things that we change, whether cops do traffic stops. Do we eliminate pretext stops? Do we eliminate all of that? Do we have, parking people do traffic stops without guns? One of them is, do we re-envision how cops are trained and what they're expected to do? The whole notion of how we police and what we do. Everyone says community safety. Are you community safety or are you like cops trying to, arrest people? I mean, they're not always the same thing. I'm not claiming to have a ton of answers for how we reimagine policing. I know a lot of major police chiefs around the country are saying this is going to take really re-looking at what policing is. And why not? Do you know we've made almost no reforms to policing? If you think about it, there have been almost no major reforms to how policing is done in like 80 years. In terms of how they're trained, I don't mean technique, but how they're trained, what they're trained to do. The idea of you shoot to kill, shoot for lethal force, arm them with guns. All the notions of policing have been in place forever. There's been almost no real revisioning. We've reimagined everything in the world. Maybe we literally need to reimagine policing and not just how you train people to be the police officers we have today. I'm talking about, do we need a different role altogether for what policing in America is and how policing works and what it's intended to do, especially with all the mental health crisis stuff going on? Cops aren't trained to be mental health experts. They're not trained to intervene in that, but can you just train them? Or do we, again, need to re-envision something different? Yes and no, Cruson. I am and I'm not. I know what you're saying. I understand that some of the calls for defunding the police talk about having police in different roles, but I'm not saying I'm not saying abolish police. I'm not saying we don't need to have an enforcement mechanism. If you took away people with guns to stop violent crime, You think of what you would have. You'd have a disaster zone. You'd have a war zone of criminals just getting away with murder, especially in the cities. So I'm not saying you don't need police with guns who need to enforce violent crime, but I'm saying we have police with guns enforcing violent crime, and and homicide cops and narcotics cops, and you also have those same cops doing traffic stops and intervening in mental health disputes and domestic abuse disputes. So I'm not actually saying what the defund the police are saying. I'm not saying get rid of police. I'm saying reimagine policing. And that doesn't mean not having police officers who are on the streets with guns to stop violent crime. But it also may mean reimagining punishment. Why do we still put people in prison for nonviolent crimes? This police officer I was hanging out with, his son went to prison for 5 years. Because he shot a gun over someone's head who was threatening him. And the person even said he didn't shoot it at me, shot it over me. And he got probation. He broke his probation smoking a joint. And so they put him in prison for 5 years. Just a waste of time. And we don't have any viable rehab things for when people get out. We've got tons of people in prison for nonviolent offenses. Maybe we need a restitution-based system for non-violent offenses. So we have to reimagine the whole thing, in my mind. But part of the uncomfortable dialogue, and Don Lemon talked about it with a bunch of police chiefs, saying we need to start having uncomfortable conversations. And I'm going to say, I started that trend, the uncomfortable conversation trend. But I do think we need to start having uncomfortable conversation. Good point, Monkey Arms. Maybe increase their education, raise the bar, revocable, make a national standard. All could be good ideas. Still fundamentally need to see if we're actually asking them to do the wrong things, right? And increasing their education level. I don't know. Would a smarter person make a better decision? Don Lemon's no dummy. He's going, I don't want to be in that position of having to decide in 2 seconds whether I pull the trigger or don't pull the trigger in that situation. So I'm not sure just how much intelligence matters. But I'm not saying it can be stupid, but there's a street smart element to it. So, re-envisioning the whole crime and punishment model is what we kind of need to be doing. Again, why do we send people to prison for nonviolent crimes instead of having a restitution-based approach to punish people and make it a two-tiered thing? If you commit violence, if you use a weapon, if you use physical violence, it's going to be worse for you because we'll lock you up. If you don't, we'll never lock you up. Right there, you start creating a bifurcation that could be good. To the two sides argument. Okay, I want to switch gears here for a second and get to the second part of all this. Two sides that are going to have to work together are going to be in politics too. I love this picture of MTJ and AOC. They're the right and the left. It's like the prize fight, right? There's, Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC. There they are. And this is Marjorie Taylor Greene. And then she has a tweet. I love it. The two of them, like, they're getting ready to go at it. But no, they're actually having a little dialogue. And she says, I'm glad I ran into you today at AOC to plan our debate about the Green New Deal. After I finish reading all 14 pages like we agreed, I'll schedule time for our debate. People made a lot of fun about this, whether it was she was mocking the 14 pages, but also in reality, she had said she'd not read the bill. So AOC was like, you have to read the bill before we do this. But wouldn't it be great to see those two debate? They're two of the high profile on the left and the right. And it's going to take people like AOC and MTJ who are polar opposite and their camps hate the other one. MTJ is a wacko, wild QAnon conspiracy theory person, Trump loving whatever to people on the left. And AOC's a radical, insane socialist who wants to send America down into the flames of the devil, the people on the right. Those two need to work together. That's what the uncomfortable truth is going to be. They're not going to see eye to eye. They're not going to get on the same page, but they're going to have to start figuring out how at some level to do it, hearkening back to Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, when Abraham Lincoln got elected president, the first time everyone made fun of him, said he was a joke, said the guy was literally a joke. The media mocked him because he was this buffoon guy. They made fun of how he looked, how he talked, his jokes, the whole thing. But when he got elected the second time in the middle of the Civil War, it was, and by the way, the first election, it's ironic, the South, the Democrats in the South refused to recognize that Lincoln was president. Sound familiar? Like to today, flip, role, reversal, Republicans not recognizing Biden. But after the second one, you had a Northern Republicans who hated Lincoln because they felt he was waging this war and it was a waste of time and money, and they were just over it. And Southern Democrats who hated him for the same thing and literally didn't want to even recognize that he was president. And he had to somehow cross this incredibly uncomfortable divide to get people to find not just a common ground, but you weren't gonna have the South and the North suddenly all in agreement. You were going to have to work from two completely disparate positions, but hold a unified center. You know, in the second inaugural speech, Lincoln's famous line with malice toward none, with charity toward all. That's a famous line, but for a reason. Malice toward none. He just had in the middle of a horrific civil war. Almost 1 million people died. Malice toward none, charity toward all. We aren't in a civil war like that, but we're in a version of it. Speaking of which, final notes on this. Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor of California. It's official. She's announced it. Here's her tweet. I'm in. Wait, where's her tweet? There she is. I'm in. California is worth fighting for. Let me read a couple lines from her press release. California's been my home for 50 years. I knew anyone, no matter where they came from, could turn their dreams into reality, but we've seen the glimmer of the golden state reduced by one-party rule that places politics over progress. Okay, and the second one, which I liked even more, was I've been a compassionate disruptor throughout my life. And she's basically says, as Californians, we have a now or never opportunity to fix our state before it's too late. Take on entrenched politicians, special interests that fund them. We need a fighter who isn't afraid to do what's right. I'm an outsider. Okay, so what I want to point out, thanks, Crafty, is this. Caitlyn Jenner, oops, I've frozen.
Fucking Christ.
Are we back in? Hey guys, sorry about that. Right in the middle of an awesome rant. If you're still with us, I appreciate it. Okay, so where I was going with this is that Caitlyn Jenner is running. And the interesting thing about what Caitlyn Jenner is doing is she's running as a Republican. but she's running as a Republican against the establishment. And that is part of the reimagining that we're going to see is going to happen in politics right now. If you want to run as a Republican, if you want to run as a Trump Republican, if you want to run as a traditional Republican, you're not going to win in any state that isn't hardcore right. But if you want to win in a place like California, you don't run as a traditional Republican. You don't run even that you are a Republican. Thanks, monkey arms. Crafty will replace me. I'll be stepping down. You run as a candidate who's running against the establishment that's been in power and is doing nothing. You happen to have an R by your name, but you're all about environment. You're all about people. You're all about homelessness. You're all about fixing real problems. And you're not all about Trump. Now, don't dismiss Caitlyn Jenner. Polls say that 56% of people right now would reelect Gavin Newsom, and only 40% would vote for somebody else. But that's polls against no candidate. They always look that lower. When you put a real candidate, those numbers change. If I'm Gavin Newsom, I am quaking in my boots right now that Caitlyn Jenner is running. I mean, you've got a prominent LGBTQ person. Granted, the LGBTQ community, which is more left than right, is going to come out against her at some level and say she was a Trump supporter. But she disavowed Trump. But she's a prominent LGBTQ person. She's one of the leaders of, so the first famous person to kind of do that. She's part of the world's most famous family with a social media presence and influence that is massive, whether it's her stepchildren or whether it's, her biological children. And the reach she has and the ability she has, and she's a hard target to go after. You're going to attack her for what? You're going to attack her for being trans? You've got a trans candidate running as a Republican who's coming from one of the most famous families in the world. She will be formidable. She will be hard to beat. And she's running as I'm an outsider running against the establishment, not against Democrats, against an establishment that hasn't fixed anything. And here's where I go with all of this, which is that at the end of the day, whether it's in politics, whether it's in the COVID, whether it's in race, we are at a point, an inflection point, where we have to decide. Our divisions aren't going to go away. Blue versus red, black versus white. Clearly, we're only feeding them, heating them up. Social media, mainstream media on both sides, feeding the divide. And like I said, I've argued for a long time. Can we kill the divide? Can we find common ground? Well, we can find common ground, but it may not be by ending the divide. It may be by recognizing that we've got to live in a very uncomfortable place and get used to being comfortable in it, where we start having very uncomfortable conversations, white people and black people having really uncomfortable and really honest conversations, which I've tried to have about race, and where you're really honest about it and you don't get canceled for saying it. You actually have it. And we accept that the two sides aren't going to change. Run from the cops versus do what the cops say. That divide isn't going to break. I've said it a million times. Young black people are scared of cops. They've grown up being scared of cops. Cops who grew up in those neighborhoods will tell you that. And the media and the narrative has made them more scared of cops. You've got people running from cops, lying on the ground saying, I'm afraid you're going to shoot me, as they're reaching for a gun, and then they get shot. It makes no sense. Parents say don't run from the cops, and kids still do. It's irrational. But at the same time, if you want to just hate on cops for trying to do their job, that's not going to solve the problem. The two realities are going to exist. Can we find a way to start having a dialogue that reimagines all of this? Same with COVID, same with the mask, the not mask. There's a new study. MIT just came out with a new study. Two professors, peer-reviewed. So it's not a wacko thing, peer-reviewed, basically, and it's going to get a lot of attention, that says wearing masks indoors is a joke. Not literally always. They're like, but the point is, being indoors 6 feet or 60 feet apart doesn't matter. We're basically the virus, you breathe it in, you breathe it out. It's inside. If you're inside with people for 20 minutes, you might get it. If you're inside for 1 minute, you probably won't. They're like, it's just simple. They did all these mathematics and scientific tests. Basically, we're like, what we're doing is stupid. Letting people go in capacity limits inside a restaurant's dumb. Either let them in or don't. It's how long they're in. It's how ventilated the space is. The mask isn't helping you from 6 feet any more than it is from 60 feet. Again, that's okay that people didn't know that. I said from the beginning a lot, I'm not a scientist, but common sense. I said a whole lot of stuff about it, but that's not my point. My point is that at the end of the day, we're not going to stop having our divisions. So how are we going to have a real conversation that helps us figure out how do we move forward post-pandemic with two very divided views of what the pandemic was and how it works? How do we move forward in a climate where there are shootings every day, where Black people are getting shot by white cops, and where more crime is being committed in Black neighborhoods, so they're policed harder and there's more shootings, and where we literally do have a blue and a red divide, where one side thinks they're the evil empire and the other side thinks they're the alternate evil empire? How do we actually do it? Well, the way you're going to do it is by having really difficult, really hard, uncomfortable conversations. And why? And here's how I'll wrap this up. Why? Because we don't have a choice. Years ago, I had a bad accident ice climbing, hacking up the ice, and I fell off and nearly died. And I went back a year later to conquer my fear to climb again because it had been pretty scary. And I was climbing up a vertical ice wall in New Hampshire, 200 feet straight up the ice, hacking my way up with the axes and the crampons and the boots and the whole thing. And it was about 20 feet from the top. And you go rope segment by rope segment. So I'm 180 feet up, and there's not like a rope all the way to the ground. There's a rope like down to me, right? It's 180 feet under me with nothing. And my guide has already gotten to the top. And my hands are numb and hurt, and I'm frozen, and I'm tired, and my muscles are weak. And I look up to him and I say, I don't think I can make it. I can't make it. I'm done. I'm exhausted. And I'll never forget, the old dude looks down at me in a New Hampshire accent, which I won't try to repeat. And he says, don't really have a choice, do you? That's us. Can say we can't figure it out. We can't make it. We're never going to solve our differences. We're never going to give up on our divides. We're going to stay where we are. That all might be true. But we don't really have a choice. So we're going to figure out how to do it. Let's get used to being uncomfortable and figure it out. I'm Rob Nelson. Thanks for watching.